the choroid plexus, which we talked about a little bit. It's a capillary bed in each of the ventricles. Each one has a choroid plexus, specialized capillary bed that will leak, and what it leaks out is called cerebrospinal fluid. It's similar to the fluid in front of your eye, which we'll talk about in the second semester, similar to saliva, pretty similar. And those ependymal cells I mentioned yesterday, or day before yesterday in lecture, that line the ventricles and the central canal. And the ependymal cells, some of them have cilia for moving cerebrospinal fluid. They kind of beat and set up a little current. And other ones have microvilli, fold of the plasma membrane for secreting cerebrospinal fluid. Well, there are 4 chambers inside of your brain that cerebrospinal fluid is secreted into. The 2 laterals are your first 2. Well, you have to worry about 1 and 2. These are the first 2, the lateral ventricles. They are supported on this model by a little branch which represents something called the interventricular foramen. It's how the fluid gets from the lateral ventricles to the third, the one in the middle. Now on your brain model, when you take it apart, you're going to see the intermediate mass, right? You remember seeing that? We might take those to lecture maybe, I don't know, I'll see. But you remember seeing that, right? Let me see if I got a picture real quick up here of the brain. You can use this guy right here. It's the same model, just put in a different form. Right there, that little brown dot. See, what you can't see is, this is a sheath that blocks your view from seeing a lateral ventricle. But there is a little slit right here, the interventricular foramen, which is the support on this model for the lateral ventricle. And the fluid goes into the third ventricle here, which is all around that intermediate mass. Well, let me show you on my hands. The intermediate mass is part of a collection of cell bodies of neurons. And it looks like this. This is one hemisphere, this is the other hemisphere. So one hemisphere is over here, and this is the thalamus in it. The other is over here. And there's a connection point between the 2 parts of that thalamus. It goes across the middle, where my thumbs are. Well, that happens to go right across the middle of the third ventricle. So the third ventricle is all around it. Is this making sense? It's all around it. When you cut those models, like this, you see a dot with the third ventricle around it. So that dot is right there on that model. The intermediate mass, that was the bridge from the left to the right side of the thalamus. And now you have a depression on your model right here. Well, look at your model. Look at this guy. There's a hole here, right in the middle of the third ventricle. That's where the intermediate mass went through. So the model's pretty reflective of the ventricle wrapping around that intermediate mass. So where this hole is, that area is the third ventricle. The third ventricle has to communicate with the fourth, which is down here. And it does by way of a little canal here called the cerebral aqueduct, which is between the third and the fourth. So up here on this on your brains, oh man, look, let's stick. Right there is, this is the fourth ventricle here, between the fourth and the third up higher. My cheater. Stand on this. Yeah. I feel better. So there's intermediate mass right there. Third ventricle is all around here. There's the choroid plexus. Between the third and the fourth, there's a little canal here called the cerebral aqueduct. The fluid goes to the fourth ventricle here. Well, the fourth ventricle here is this end portion down here. That's the fourth ventricle. So you can see all the ventricles on this model. It looks kind of weird, but when you look at it and compare it to the picture in your book, it actually makes sense how it's laid out. Also on this model, there's some little pink things on here, pink structures. What are those? There's one per ventricle. It's choroid plexus. That's the capillary bed that makes the cerebrospinal fluid. It secretes it. So each of the ventricles has a choroid plexus in it. So when you look at your picture, that's on 284 in your lab book. If you got the lab book, textbook has got the same picture in there. You can see how this sits in the brain. Two lateral ventricles are in the lateral hemispheres, cerebral hemispheres. What's holding these up is represented by the interventricular foramen. You can see the third ventricle has a hole through the middle where the intermediate mass goes through. Third ventricle. Then there's a little channel that goes down to the fourth, cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle. And we're going to go over that in lecture also. Cerebral spinal fluid secretion and flow. Not hard. Not hard at all. Since you know parts of the brain, it's not hard. On the models, you can see that interventricular foramen slit, but you got to look close. So that's another easy one to see. In profile, let me take a bigger stick.
So in the test